a little bit more about balancing all of this selection and all this variety. There are basically two factors or two balancing overarching ideas, and that's the heterozygote advantage. So the advantage of having two chromosomes that have so each one having an allele on it or a locus on it or a locus on it, and then a frequency dependent selection. So with regard to this, the heterozygote advantage, the example that's in your book is sickle cell, and the idea behind this is you have a dominant and recessive, and individuals with the recessive allele for sickle cell, the dominant allele tends to mitigate the effects of sickle cell, whereas if you have two recessive, so homozygous recessive, you have full-blown sickle cell disease. So this heterozygote advantage means there may be modifying factors. And then with regard to the frequency dependent, I think we have an image with this, the frequency dependent, and that's the idea of these left and right mouth fish. What you have is, if you have a population, you have this population kind of oscillating between left and right mouth. And what this is each of these have a different phenotype, a different allele on a specific position, a different allele on a specific position of a chromosome. And this fish that's being eaten on, if it lives in a pool where there's just left mouth fish, then it's going to be able to attack those fish because it's just looking at its right flank. But if you have a fairly stable population of both left and right, then that fish that's being eaten on is not going to be able to really attack one or the other in with greater amount of frequency, so that that causes both of those, both the left and the right, to be maintained in a pretty stable population amount. And so this frequency dependent is approximately equal numbers of the left and the right. Natural selection can't fashion perfect organisms. Natural selection only can act on what's already there. And the evolution happened from ancient ancestors, and it's very possible the ancient ancestors were not particularly didn't give a very adaptable framework. So the ancient ancestor may have been, you have your basic framework from your ancient ancestors, and again you can have natural selection of what is the most adaptable at that time, but you still have these unfortunately maybe have something. For example, we stood upright. And that actually cost us to have a bad back. Most people have bad back problems. Standing upright helped us to see further. We could see in terms of prey, etc. But it also, unfortunately, was a ergonomic disadvantage with regard to our bodies. And the other thing, it's limited by historical constraints, so by time. So this adaptability, meaning the environment could move along faster than we can genetically reproduce and have generations to adapt for it. You also have compromises, which is one of the more interesting things. Is you may have adaptations that are great for finding prey, but they're not very great for reproduction. Or you might have adaptations that are great for reproduction. Think of that big peacock, but that tail has to be carried around all the time. And the peacock may be only using its sexual display in a very small portion of its full lifespan, but that's an acceptable compromise in the fact that that particular peacock gets to pass its genetic data on, but it's definitely a compromise. And then chance acts on natural selection. I think your book uses an example of maybe there are birds or species that are blown to an island. Now that island may be very hospitable for those species, but it may be very inhospitable. So you have the founder effect. You have species that are planted in an area that is very inhospitable for them. It will be a while before they will either not make it, or it'll be a while before they're able to evolve and become more adaptable for that environment. So there are many reasons why the perfect hasn't happened, and then in terms of however you define perfect organism, I mean, that's a whole nother story with regard to this, but there are things to think about when you're thinking about evolution and natural selection. And this is actually the Grand Canyon there, which is absolutely beautiful. And then you have the end of this and what you should be able to do after going through this entire chapter. I will see you in the next chapter.